Have you ever been to Bath, however they say it, that town in England? It is one of my favorite places on earth. The architecture alone is so stunning. From the Roman baths, to the Abbey, to the Georgian houses of the Royal Crescent. I mean, the city's love of Jane Austen is palpable, just like mine. But all of that, great as it is, pales in comparison with the supple majesty that is the Sally Lunn Bun, the original Bath bun. And that's what we're talking about today on Tasting History. So nobody outside of the Sally Lunn house where they make them knows the actual recipe for the Sally Lunn Bun. But in 1826, a rather presumptuous Margaret Dods took a stab at it herself in the Cook and Housewife's Manual. Make them as French bread, but dissolve some sugar in the hot milk. Mold into the form of cakes. A little saffron boiled in the milk enriches the color of these or any other cakes. Not the most detailed of recipes. So in 1979, Elizabeth David, in her book English Bread and Yeast Cookery, filled in some of the gaps left by Miss Dodds, and subsequent bakers have thrown their hat in the ring to try to figure out exactly what makes these Sally Lunn buns so amazing. So the recipe that we're using today is pulled from all sorts of different resources and is not the actual Sally Lunn Bun because nobody knows it. But it will be enough to hold you over until you get to Bath yourself. Bath. What you'll need is 1 1/4 cup or 280 milliliters of whole milk, 6 tablespoons or 85 grams of butter at room temperature, 1/4 cup or 50 grams of sugar, a pound or 450 grams of bread flour. You can also use all-purpose if that's what you have, 7 grams of either instant yeast or active dry yeast, 2 eggs, plus an optional extra egg for an egg wash at the end, the zest of 1 lemon, 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt, and 2 or 3 threads of saffron, optional. It's just there for the color, and it's because that's something that was mentioned in older recipes of the Sally Lunn Bun. First, as Margaret Dodds prescribes, warm the milk over a low heat. Now, if you are using instant yeast, go ahead and warm the full cup and quarter right now. But if you're using active dry yeast, then you're going to need to probably activate that yeast by putting it into a 1/4 cup of milk. So take a 1/4 cup of the whole milk and warm it to just over room temperature. You could probably just leave it out for a little while. And then put the active dry yeast in there and just a pinch of the sugar as well, and let that sit until it becomes nice and foamy, so you know that it's working, and then heat the other cup of milk. Now if you're using just instant yeast, go ahead and ignore what I just said and heat the full cup and 1/4 of milk over the stove. Now you want to make sure that it's over low heat because you don't want to scorch the milk. If you do, you'll have to throw it all out and start over again. So once the milk has started to warm, add the sugar and stir it in to dissolve. And then once you get to about 100 degrees, add the butter and let it melt in. Now if you are going to use the saffron threads because you want that darker color, drop them in the milk now. Once the butter is melted, and it should only take a couple minutes at most, remove the pot from the heat and let it cool to 110 degrees Fahrenheit at most. Can't be any more than that or else it can kill the yeast, and we don't want that. Then in the bowl of a stand mixer or just a regular bowl, sift in the flour, and if you are using instant yeast, add that now and whisk together. If you're using the active dry yeast, hold off. Then add the warm milk mixture, then your lemon zest, the 2 eggs, and the salt. Again, if your yeast is already in there, you can set it on medium and start to mix all of the ingredients together. If you're using the active dry yeast, now is the time to add it. But go ahead and give a little mix to the ingredients just so the active dry yeast doesn't touch the salt directly, because that can also kill it. Yeast is a very delicate flour. It's not a flower, but it's just a saying. Now, regardless of which yeast you used, we should be in the same place, and you can go ahead and turn the mixer on medium for about 7 or 8 minutes, or until the dough really kind of comes together. It's not going to form a ball because it is very sticky, but it'll become nice and smooth on the outside. Now you can do this by hand, but just like brioche dough, this is a really, really sticky dough, so it's annoying to do by hand. So I encourage you to use a mixer if you have one, but if you don't, that's okay. Just get ready. Once the dough has come together and is nice and smooth, cover it with a tea towel and leave it for about an hour to 90 minutes or until the dough has doubled in size. So last summer I visited Bath, and I stayed just across the lane from the oldest house in the city, which is now the Sally Lunn house. And I knew there was a baked good inside that building because, one, I could smell it all day, and two, I had seen it on the Great British Bake Off and just fallen in love with it. And I guess everyone else in England had also seen it on the Great British Bake Off because there was a line from open to close all the way around the corner. And I ain't got no time for that. I had a jam-packed schedule. I had to take falconry lessons, I went on a horse, and I had tons of fancy houses to gawk at. So I figured Sally Lunn would just have to wait until the next trip. But on my last night, now, I don't know if you believe in miracles, but if you do, this is up there with, like the Shroud of Turin, because on my last night, only minutes before the Sally Lunn house was supposed to close, a wind blew through the alley and swept all the customers away, just like it did the nannies in Mary Poppins. Or at least I'm assuming that's what happened because when I turned the corner, there was nobody in line, so I just walked right in. It was pretty awesome. So not only did I get to enjoy one of the most magnificent, pillowy, slightly sweet breads that I have ever had the pleasure of tasting, but also the charming young woman in the museum that they have downstairs was able to give me a full history of the Sally Lunn. Now the story, as was told to me on that warm August evening last summer, starts in the 1680s with a young Huguenot woman named Solange Luyon. She had fled France after being persecuted for her Protestant faith and ended up in Bath, taking a job at a bakery selling the baker's wares on the street. But at night, she would experiment with her own baked goods. And one night, the baker came downstairs to find her making a bread that he had never seen before. A big, soft brioche bun with a smooth, shiny top. So he decided to start selling them upstairs, and they were a hit. And whenever anyone would ask, "What is this?" he would say, "Oh, that is a Solange Lunn Bun." Well, just like Harry Potter had to dumb down the name of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for American audiences to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, I don't really see how that's any easier, so did Solange Lunn have to dumb down her own name for her English customers. And she dumbed it down to Sally Lunn, which I guess was easier to pronounce. And thus was born the Sally Lunn Bun. But I ask you, is that really where the Sally Lunn Bun came from? Well, let's look at the evidence. It seems like the first mention of the Sally Lunn actually happened in writing almost 100 years later in 1776 in a poem by Irish poet William Preston, where he talked of Sally Lunn and saffron cake. Now we know that around this time, the bun had become a centerpiece in what were known as public breakfasts. And that is when the very wealthy of England would come to Bath and mingle at pleasure gardens, famous in Georgian Bath. And it was at one of these breakfasts that we actually get a dire warning about the Sally Lunn Bun from author and eccentric Philip Thinkneys. In his 1780 publication, The Valetudinarian's Bath Guide, by the way, valetudinarian, like my new favorite word, it means someone who is overly worried about their health, perfect for the time that we're living in, I suppose. Thinkneys tells of a young man who fell to his death after a hearty breakfast of spongy hot rolls, or Sally Lunns. He said, "Such a meal few young men in full health can get over without feeling much inconvenience." Sinister. The plot thickens when in 1827 Sally Lunn herself was mentioned as having been selling the buns on the street only 30 years previous. Well, that would put Sally Lunn at like 140 years old. Inconceivable! Finally, in 1845, Eliza Acton gives us a recipe for a rich French breakfast cake called a solimem, derived from soleil lune, or sun and moon cake, because of the color of the top being dark and yellow, and then you open it up and the inside is nice and white, or from the top being yellow and the bottom being white, depending on who you ask. Anyway, soleil lune, Sally Lunn. It's pretty close. I don't know who to believe. But frankly, it doesn't really matter. You know, sometimes with history, it's very important to get the exact facts and figures. And sometimes it's not. And then sometimes it's just impossible. And I think that this time it's one of those. And frankly, it's a bun, you know, so Personally, I'm going to go with the more romantic story of Solange Louillon coming over from France after being persecuted and finding work in a bake shop in Bath. But regardless of which story you prefer, that one or the Soleil Lune, it is most important that you hit the like button on this video for the YouTube algorithm. Now if you visit Bath, and I suggest that you do, it's very important that you actually go to the Sally Lunn house to get a Sally Lunn bun. Because if you ask for a Bath bun anywhere else in the city, you're probably going to get something quite different. Smaller, more compact, and much sweeter. But I think that will need to wait for another tasting history, because it's about time to shape our buns. So once your dough has doubled in size, punch it down and dump it out onto a lightly floured surface. Then divide the dough into 6 equal-ish pieces and form each into a round ball. Now, because it is sticky, it might be easier if you put a little flour on your hands before forming the balls. Then set each ball onto a baking sheet. Now, I would suggest using either parchment paper or a silpat like I use, and if you do not have a silpat, let me change your life by suggesting that you get one. I have a link down in the description where you can get one, but you can also just go to any cooking store and they will have them, and they are amazing. So then gently flatten the dough balls into cakes. Now these will be about 4 inches across. The actual Sally Lunns are huge. They're like this big, like the size of my face, and that's a big face. So you can do that, but then this recipe will only make 3. That's fine. I'm doing 6 because I don't need a piece of bread that big. Once they're pressed down a bit, cover the buns and let them rise for another 45 minutes to an hour, or until they're quite puffy. Now you can use anything to cover them. I wouldn't suggest a tea towel because it's kind of heavy and is going to leave marks on the buns. I used aluminum foil because it actually kind of keeps away from the buns, but you can also use saran wrap or whatever. Now if you do use aluminum foil, make sure to keep it because you might need it later on to cover the buns if they start to brown too much in the oven. Now about 30 minutes into that second rise, preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius and get ready to make your egg wash. Now if you didn't use saffron, I would suggest using a whole egg, yolk and whites, and just mix it until it's nice and frothy, and that's what you'll use. If you did use saffron, it's already going to get kind of dark, so I would just use the white to make it nice and shiny on top. So once the oven is ready and your buns have puffed up, brush them with the egg wash and set them in the oven for 15 minutes. Now take a look at them about 10 minutes in, because if they are darkening too much, then you're going to want to tent them with that aluminum foil. I ended up putting one on top and one on bottom, and so I didn't have to tent them, but I'll say the ones on top ended up turning out better. I don't know if it was because of the silpat or because they started on top, but there it is. Now, if you have watched this show before, you'll know that my oven sucks, and it's sometimes hard to tell if something is done or not. So I rely on this, which is an instant read thermometer, lifesaver, especially for breads, but really can be used for anything. I used it to warm the milk. It's good for candy as well. But I'll link to those down below. But if you are using a thermometer, then you're looking for 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit for the inside of the bread. So once they're baked through, take them out of the oven and let them cool on a wire rack. Now you can serve them slightly warm, but you'll want to let them cool somewhat. And these can be served with butter or jam or clotted cream if you have it, but I'm going to try one just plain. So you're supposed to just tear them open, which is actually rather easy to do. It just tears fairly well. And you get a top and a bottom. And I'm going to start with the top. Oh my god, make these. It's worth it. It's like eating one of the clouds of heaven. It's so soft. It's a little sweet, but not too sweet. Anything will go on this. You could even put like savory stuff, like lox or something. I'm gonna eat all 6 of these. I should have made the really big ones. Anyway, I encourage you to make these. I encourage you to visit Bath. It's one of the most amazing cities in the world. And I encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so I can see you next time on Tasting History. Eating the rest of this.